Well, great, thank you. I'm Henry Fittner with BKV Group. With me online, you've got Rod Miller with CRS. You probably know Rod pretty well. And yeah, he's got his Michigan mug up as he always does. So and Paul Coughlin, who's both good friends of mine here, and we've been working together for a while. And Paul is with the Mission Driven. I always forget the last part of it, Mission Driven something, yeah. But and he's also a jail administrator. But one of these days I'll get it right. I haven't seen.
Aaron check.
Okay, let's try that again. Nice. It's good that you have the IT background too. So yeah. So anyway, we were asked to take a look at the needs assessment findings and see what our thoughts were overall with that. And I'm going to introduce Rod to kind of give you an introductory to what we're up to, and I'll keep moving the slides as we go. Ready, Rod?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
From what I can see of the group, it looks like after school detention that I remember from my high school days. But that's not the arrangement as much as the expression I think on Terry's face there. My name is Rod Miller, and I'm kind of the instigator of this. Well, I live in Gettysburg. I grew up in Michigan. I went to a small Midwestern university there. And after I heard that the needs assessment was going to be bypassed, I offered my services to the county to fill that gap, because you need to do this work before you go out to the voters. And so today, and then of course I thought of BKV because there's some technical things that have to be done. And I thought these guys probably would bite on donating their services at this point. And they jumped on board. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about the needs assessment, what it will involve. We're going to ask you for some people to work with to do the, to have a couple of meetings that will work through some of these issues. And we will do that in a time frame that meets your needs to get this work brought into the larger group by the end of June. And what's up on the screen? Is that the photos?
Oh, yeah, they're not.
Oh, geez. Yeah, I was so much younger then.
Yeah, it didn't look like you.
It occurs to me that photo was taken in Traverse City when I was doing an NIC technical assistance there, and it was a little while ago.
Yeah.
And, I started a nonprofit organization when I was in school at Michigan in 1972, and I've been working with that ever since. I've done about 30 pre-architectural planning studies around the country, starting in Michigan, and I think the favorite to this group would have been Franklin County, Ohio, where I was on the team that did the master plan for their jail system. If you don't know Franklin County, Ohio, that's where Columbus is. So basically the Franklin County Board of Commissioners had to hire a Michigan person to sort out their mess with their jail. And I take a great deal of pride about that, but that's just me. The other folks that you'll see today, and as we work in the next month and a half, is Henry Pittner from the BKV group. BKV is an interesting firm, and I met them in Alpena. They were hired after the referendum to design the jail. They were given a budget that was approved by the voters that was about 15%, maybe more, maybe more short of what was needed because of the calculations that were done by the former architects when we were doing the planning. So they walked into a difficult situation. I've worked with a lot of architectural firms, and I've never seen a group work harder than BKV and spend more time on site to bring that project in, to get everything that they were looking for and bring it in on budget. It was quite an experience. I'm really impressed with them. I've worked with them in some other projects in other states. And they're not here because they've been hired to do anything. They're donating their time. Our understanding is that when the voters approve this, at that point, the county will go and look for architects all over and interview people that would be interested. And I'm guessing BKV might be interested. But in the meantime, they're here on their own dime. Paul Coughlin is in Carlton County right now. He's in the final throes of opening a new facility, and Carlton County is in Minnesota, and it's right below, what is it? It's right below, what's your
Duluth,
county to the north?
St. Louis.
St. Louis, and
Which
Duluth,
is-
Minnesota.
Yeah, so you've got a big neighbor to the north, but I worked with them on their pre-architectural work. Paul is going to help out a little bit in this stage and later if they come back. And he's got some really good on the ground experience. And then the smiling fellow who's in black and white, Mike, is working with. He has an architectural background as well as statistics, planning, pre-architectural planning. So he'll also be involved. Paul and Mike have already pulled together and updated the data that you've provided. And so today they will talk about some of the initial findings for the big group, just so you know what we're finding as far as the numbers and the projections and stuff. But the face-to-face work on this will be done with another group that you folks put together. And we'll work through all these steps that we talk about at that point. Next slide, I guess. Oh, look, I got my pose ready and everything. This needs assessment is a very specific set of work. I think most of you have seen something about it and what it involves, but it's necessary to take a lot of the different elements that go into planning. In this case, a new jail, and in the broader sense, the public safety facility. And to combine those and talk to you as the owners and eventual operators and inject the latest data, the latest thinking in terms of design and the field, and especially the values that you bring to the project and what you want to accomplish with it. And that's the piece that is really important to be done before you decide to go out to the voters. And that's the piece that will be done face to face there. So this is a really important conceptual piece, but it's also the piece that will update and finalize for the project that goes to the voters, the scale, the size, the scope, and as importantly, the nature of the jail part of the facility, coupled with the public safety center elements. So that's where we're heading with this. Let me do the next one. Is this Scrabble? Is that what that is? No, I don't think so.
Close.
This process is a lot more than the numbers. It's really trying to get a handle on what you want a new jail facility as part of this complex, what you want it to accomplish, how you want it to do it, what kind of partnerships you plan to have with the community. And so this is the part of the process that's my favorite, because we're not talking about plans and designs yet, we're talking about concepts. My experience with Antrim County is that you guys are pretty good about talking about a wide range of issues. And this is the place where that comes together, and it meets with some data and a bunch of experience that the team brings in terms of how this comes together and what it will look like conceptually going out. My understanding at this point is that the facility will not be designed before it goes out to the voters. To try to do that at this point, I think would be ill-advised. It would truncate a lot of the important discussions. And I'll refer back to Alpena, which I worked on before and after the referendum. They didn't take a plan to the voters. They took the costs, the operating costs, as well as the construction costs and the concepts. And after that was approved in 2017, they advertised for architects. They interviewed a lot of firms and they made their decision. And at that point, the design began in earnest. And that's my understanding of what will happen here. So when this passes, that's when you can pick the firm that you want to work with and roll up your sleeves and get started with the details. I've taken probably a couple dozen facilities in 7 or 8 states out to the voters. And my experience has been, if you show them a plan with a lot of detail, they will tend to focus on those details rather than the big picture that you're asking them to look at. I think the best example of that was Houghton County, the first time they went out for a referendum, and they provided even renderings of the outside, and the community's response was, we don't like the color scheme. And they kind of missed the point on that one. So the scope of this and this work will stay within those boundaries, and the discussions will be with you and your counterparts and people that you decide to put in the room with us. These are the elements that will be looked at here. I know everybody gets tired of mission statements and all that. I think Ohio State invented that. I think they just did that to punish us. But the mission statement's really important. And you've done a lot of that work already, I know, and we need to bring that again to focus on the jail piece in terms of what you want it to do. I was on the Citizens Committee in Washtenaw County that did this work prior to building what was then in 1974, the new Washtenaw County Jail. And believe me, there was a lot of discussion about sizing the facility. Oakland County had just built a mega jail thinking they'd be able to, it would last forever, and it filled up in a matter of a couple of years. So that discussion about right sizing the facility was very, very important at that time. We need to develop enough procedural and operational information to inform the planning process at this time so that we can be sure that the scale and the dimensions and also really the operational pieces of the puzzle are considered so that when the all important cost that's to be taken to the voters is factored in, that's going to be as accurate as possible. The facility planning piece is pretty straightforward. And again, it takes it to the point of having the concepts and the volumes and the nature of the spaces so that pricing can be taken off of that. And the design will begin in earnest, I'll say after the referendum is approved. And then the staffing piece, which I can half see here because I'm blocking it with myself. I have about 40 years experience in jail staffing, and I've written and co-authored the books on the subject. And the staffing is critical because over the life cycle of the building, staffing is going to comprise, 80% of the total cost? Paul, is that in the ballpark? He's shaking his head.
Correct.
And the staffing, the design needs to be considered as you go through this process to make sure that the staffing is anticipated. In Alpena, I provided the staffing estimate prior to the referendum, and I came back and I worked with the folks there to open the facility, and the staffing that was funded by the county commissioners match what we asked for when we went to the voters. And so that piece of it's very important, and it's something that Paul and I bring a lot of experience to when it comes that time. Ooh. This is the piece of the process that's going to look at the system, not just the criminal justice system, but the human service system, all the different pieces that go into the population, that go into the people that will interface with the facility when it's finally approved and built. And alignments are some of the discussions that we'll discuss in these work sessions with you in terms of how these align. Has anybody been to the St. Clair County facility? Doesn't sound, I don't think so. And so I can say whatever I want, right? I lived in St. Clair. I tell people I could see Canada from my house, but that was actually true. St. Clair took this took a really important direction. And what they did was to consider that they wanted the path to be intaked into the facility to include some stopovers with various alternatives at the front end and screening at the front end that might divert people to a more appropriate setting. Substance abuse is one. So these discussions are really important to have at the front end of this process, and those are the ones that we'll be having with you. This is this diagram was developed by the Justice Department, I think in 1967. Wow. And it's still there, but this is a depiction of what the flow chart is from the crime being committed to going through the adjudication, sentencing, corrections, and release after that. I have nightmares about this sometimes at night, but there's a lot of twists and turns. When we worked in Franklin County in Columbus, they had a district attorney who was very interested in alternatives to jail and alternative sentencing. That factored into the sizing of it. And so this process, this flow chart, these alignments, as they apply to Antrim County, will be part of the discussions as well. I think I'm going to turn it over here because I don't know where I am on this graph, but I have a hunch I'm probably off the chart somewhere, probably not in a good way.
Outlier somewhere.
Yeah, well, I think I'm way out here somewhere.
All right, Paul.
All right, thanks, Henry, and thanks, Rod. I like the first couple of slides, or the last two slides that Rod, just because it shows how confusing this work can be. So I hope that as we discuss your specific jail data and some of the things that we plan to do over the next couple months is to help bring this into focus. This is an important slide to me because when you start to look at statistics and the law of diffusion, we want to make sure that we design the system based on what your typical process is seen and who's in the jail, not on outliers. I worked for the sheriff's office for 29 years. About 18 of that was out on patrol. And then the last decade plus has been in the jail. And we went through a lot of studies. And I think understanding anecdotal stories and how important they can be to certain parts of the system, we don't want to design the system based on anecdotal stories, the worst case scenario or the best case scenario that certain people have experienced. We want to use that law of diffusion and try to develop a system that takes into account everybody that normally goes through your system. This slide is really just to show you that the next couple graphs that we're going to work through is based off of information that Mike had received and processed from the Antrim County jail population. So this is really just a source sheet, so you can see what the source of the information is, and then we can go on to the next slide.
What does ADP mean?
Sorry.
Adult daily population.
Yeah. Average daily population.
Thanks.
ALOS, average length of stay. Down here. average length of stay down here. ALS. All kinds of jargon. Next slide. Paul?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, please. So this slide just shows us overall some graphic information about your system. And this is a historical review. I want to make sure that we note that this is historical data that was provided to Henry and then to Mike, or Rod to Mike. I'm not sure what the flow was there, but this is processed data directly from Antrim County, looking at what we know you've experienced in the last 12 years. If you look at the 2010 to the 2022 time frame. And the graphs really are just meant to show overall in the first graph, the male female population from 18 to 22 just shows you the overall average daily population, which is the blue, the tallest bars, and then the orange and the green just show the breakdown between male and female. And I think it's important to understand the historical trend that you can see based on this is that the population has had its peaks, but overall, as a general, over that time frame, has had a declining amount, which is more shown in the second graph, which is your total adult and male average daily population. So the average daily population takes into account who's coming each day, who's leaving each day, and then ultimately what that average over that time period is. So you might have 10 inmates one day, 20 inmates the next, and then your average daily population defaults to 15. So it is all statistics, but ultimately you're able to see it. And what we're trying to do here is develop what the overall trend is for Antrim County, or specifically the jail. Any questions about those two graphs?
Do you have an idea of why we've gone down so much in the last 10 years?
I personally do not. I haven't seen enough data. I think that's part of what we would want to do, is to take a deeper dive into. Again, I have reviewed and looked at the needs assessment that you had completed. I don't know that that is adequate either. What we did in Carleton, which is one of the main, I've worked in several different counties, but it took us quite a bit of studies and quite a bit of different slicing of the pie per se, of what exactly could happen, because you have to start to factor in court data, maybe some changes around judicial appointment, or why the system is operating. You know, it could be a new county attorney, it could be a new sheriff, it could be new policy, or a statewide, change in policy from a state level that can drive this. I know that there's been some recent changes in Michigan, but not over the length that this is. So unless someone locally had, I would look to the sheriff and the jail administrator to probably have a better idea than I can, just from reviewing the data on what that overall declining trend is.
In 2020, it had to do with COVID. Between 2020 through 2022, we had COVID restrictions, so
Okay.
we weren't taking people into custody.
That makes sense.
Separate ballots.
So now if we did like the 23, you could see a rise in.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you can see that there's a rise, specifically if you look at 22, the female population is starting to increase. And the males is also increasing slightly as you look across that. The only thing I can note is that you don't peak where you were pre-COVID, which is that 18 to 20 timeframe, is that you haven't grown back. I'm not saying you won't, but ultimately the peaks don't seem to have gone back to that level where you were above 40.
And the reforms that were made by the legislature in 2021 and started in 2022, those are very sweeping reforms that really changed the nature of the people that were eligible to go into the jail and into the local justice system. And I think we'll see some real hard data coming up that shows that's had an impact both on admissions and ADP.
The next slide, Rod, or Henry. So this slide looks a little bit deeper into the population that makes up your average daily population. And you can see that about 50% are sentenced and 50% are pretrial. This is an important graphic because most likely we should be working with those different individuals that are in the jail based on the status that they have. Obviously, you work with pretrial detainees less because they're not committed of a crime yet, and you're trying to, process them through the system, whatever that looks like, looking at alternatives that maybe allow them to be in the community, which is what the state appears to be trending towards, as Rod just noted. And then the second part of that is your sentenced individuals who are likely to be with you a little bit longer. And there you would be looking at programs, or what are you doing with those individuals so that they return to the community. Most, 95% or higher of your jail population will return to the local community. So it's important to make sure that we're looking at alternatives as part of that sentence that gives them the best chance to return to the community in a positive way that stops any recidivism of their coming back. So again, this more or less is the same ADP chart, but just showing your sentenced versus unsentenced residents. Next slide. So again, this is looking more or less at that trending. Again, it's a full 12-year trend from 2010 to 2022. And you can see that there, clearly was a higher usage from 10 to 15. I'm unaware of what happened, but there's a significant drop to 17 before COVID, where there's this more drop in 2020. And then now a start to come back, but you're less than, shouldn't say less, you're around 50% of your overall ADP back from 2010 to 2015. Go ahead, Henry. Again, another trending. This is not looking at your ADP, but this is looking at the bookings. So this is the average bookings that the jail has, people coming into the jail each day. And again, it looks like the jail usage, so the front end, people that are coming and getting booked into jail, is where part of that decline is coming from. This graph clearly shows that, your high was 1,200 people coming into the jail in 2012. And then during COVID, as you said, you can see that there's a significant drop in jail usage down to that 400 number, which is, again, a third of what it was back in 2012. But even in 2018 to 2019, I'm not sure what happens there, but that continuously shows up in the graphs. There's a significant decline that accelerates through COVID, which is that 2019 to 2020 drop. And you're starting to recover, but from the recovery and the trending we can see, it doesn't look like it's going back, at least at the rate that it's going back to where it was back in the early 2010s to 2010s. This is a little bit of a more active graph and the average length of stay. So this is, again, splitting the data a little bit differently. This is the amount of people that you have in jail and then taking how long are they in jail. This will also need a little bit more of a look because you have a 50% sentenced population overall, which could add to your length of stay. If the length of stay is this long and they're pre-trial, that is something that we would want to look at because they should be processed one way or the other, depending on what level of crime they're charged with, quicker than the 20 days that it's showing in 2021. But again, there may be something that locally is happening that someone at the jail or the sheriff's office would be able to tell us. But if that length of stay is simply associated with the sentenced individuals, then there's no issue here that I could see that we would want to look at that. We would just want to do a length of stay study with the segregation between those that are pretrial and those that are sentenced. And again, it just helps us to show how, when you get to the planning process, you would want to make sure, do you need help with transition, or intake? So somewhere that they're going to be for 4 or 5 days as, they either sober up or whatever brought them to jail. It's a safe place for that to take place. It keeps you and staff safe as well as far as risk, as well as everybody's physical safety. And then build a second part of the jail or a different part that deals with the sentenced inmates, because again, you don't want those mixed with the pretrial, and ultimately there should be a different level of programming that's happening with someone that's going to be with you for a while. So I just wanted to show this because the length of stay is a significant number higher, so almost double of what it was in the early 2010s. But again, if it's due to sentencing, then we would just want to make sure that we have the correct space available in the jail for management purposes for people that are going to stay for a longer period of time with some more programming space.
Can I chip in for a second on that too?
Yes, please, Rod.
Our experience has been that the average length of stay is a pretty deceptive number. And when we break this down and get more detailed data, what we'll find in general is that you'll have the general pattern is 80% or so of the admissions will be released within 3 or 4 days, and they will account for maybe 5 or 10% of the bed days of the average daily population. And it's the longer term admissions, whether they're long-term pretrial because of their offense and the processing, or sentenced, those are the ones that really rack up the beds. So we'll be able to break down how that looks. You can see a drop in the admissions that may not be reflected as much in the length of stay because of that. We need to get the detailed data to be able to do that analysis with you in the next few weeks.
So this is the final slide. And again, Mike was the one that processed all these. I just helped review them. So if you look at the first slide, the projected admissions, again, this is reflective of the line graph that we saw turn into a bar graph, where you can see in 2012 was your high point. Your admissions have come down. And then Mike, using some calculations, projected those admissions out to 2045. And again, based on the overall historical review, which is what you're looking at over the last 12 years, it shows a decline pretty continuously. There's a little bit of a recovery in 2019, but you're still nowhere near where you were in the early 2010s. And so finally, that brings us to the last graph here, which is your projected requirements from 2025 to 45 in your bed capacity within the facility. Again, the different bars represent different type of projections that Mike used to create those, showing somewhere around the 30 to 45, approaching higher 40s as far as ADP, all the way out to 2045. So one of the biggest things you'd want to make sure is that you have enough beds to begin with, or you have the ability to add beds if you need them into the future, because again, things can change. No one knew COVID was coming. Some of the legislative pressure that states are feeling to reduce jail capacity obviously could be reversed. So you want to make sure that you build something that meets your needs and your projected needs, but not overbuild. You'd want to make pay-as-you-go planning to make sure that you have a space available to add on to the facility if need be, but not create a bunch of beds that then have to be staffed and sit empty. That's the worst case scenario, because then your long-term operating costs continue to be problematic. So Mike had put in here a 56-bed jail. Clearly looks like it's above with peaking factor to give you some cushion from a management factor. A management factor.
And I need to interrupt, Paul. I'm sorry. These are the BKV numbers, that second graph. We have not run projections. It's premature. We need to work with your group to do that. These are the projections that came out from the 2018 BICE study. And when we look at those compared to the more recent numbers, it's very likely that when the projections are rerun, that line is going to come down. So I'm sorry to interrupt on that, but we have not done projections yet. We won't do those until we work with you. But the new data that adds, 5 more years of data, all of which were trending downward or in a lower plateau, will definitely change what that initial capacity, including the peaking, which we call the classification factor, will probably not be the same. And so I don't want you to think that we're just going to take the old numbers and extend them further.
Are you sure about that, Rod? Because the 2018 study showed a 70 recommended jail, not 56. And those numbers look lower than what were in that 2018.
Yeah, the numbers, well, we need to talk about it, but those are not the numbers that. Well,
sure, those are the final
we need
numbers.
to look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, these are not the BICE numbers. These are ones that Mike, and again, they're not full projections. They're just an explanation of where you have been. Again, that look backwards, which is a 12-year look, and what that looks like going forward as far as a trend. It's not the full projection that Rod is talking about. And that's why I just, there's other factors that come in, whether it's management factors, so you have room to move people around, the classification factor that Rod just spoke to. So just wanted to kind of show you overall, this is what, again, historical broadcasting out what those projections are for admissions as well as the bed space again, but not a complete projection on the facility. So
I
I think
have
that's
a
what Rod
question
was-
from the crowd here, guys.
The majority of the information has been annual. I assume that we have an influx in July and August that look different than January and February.
Mhm.
I'm assuming that we're taking that into account when we're looking at our capacity required.
Population trends. Yeah. Yeah, that's the peaking and classification of
Because
the.
all the numbers have been annual numbers.
Yes,
We haven't gone by monthly numbers.
yeah. So there's a ton of work to do at the end of the day to really nail down what's going on, how it works.
People like to vacation here, not Columbus.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we wanted to at least get a start on it. Basically, it's an update of the other data to see where we are here at this point at least. So,
Yeah, can I ask a question? Is there, I don't see 2023.
this was
I
the,
didn't go through 2000.
You have to speak up a little bit.
I did only
They
do
can't hear you guys
2022.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
right,
I
The data
my
we have.
2023 wasn't in there.
yeah,
So. Okay, thank you.
great, thank you. Anything else, Paul, Rod, Mike, do you have anything to say about any of it?
I don't think Mike made it on, Henry. He texted me. He wasn't able to follow the link in. So I don't think he's been able to get in yet.
He's there.
Oh, is he? Did he get in? Okay.
Yeah.
Then I won't speak for him. Sorry.
Yeah, or at least he shows up. I don't know if he can hear us. All right. Anything else, guys?
Nothing for me.
Okay, we're in the home stretch here. So, I'll be doing the rest of this piece, just a couple of slides. So part of it was taking a look overall at the whole, needs assessment. You also have to realize 5 years has passed and within a 10-year time frame, all kinds of things have changed and operationally, both in the jail and for law enforcement. So everything that the sheriff's team is doing on both sides of the house is way different than it's ever been. And it continues to evolve. Part of it is kind of the decline in bed capacity that you just saw that's been happening as a trend here. Part of it is obviously the shift in legislation. But there's also all kinds of evolving evidence-based best practices that we didn't have 5 years ago, we didn't have 10 years ago, that should be incorporated as part of the discussion that we're going to have in putting this together so that we get the operations the way your community wants it and needs it at the end of the day. So law enforcement, obviously the same way, evidence and all kinds of stuff is way different than it's been in the past. What we think is required from what we saw and with these changes as they've been happening is we probably need to do a reprogramming of the space list that's within the to test that and see if anything's changed and how you want to operate and do things. Because the size of the building depends on that. There's also a couple of anomalies within that space lists in terms of grossing factors and things that we want to take another look at with you to be sure. It's, the fun thing about a space list is it's just geometry at the end of the day. You can have a cell and the space in front of it and how it connects to everything. And I can calculate all that by putting a diagram together that shows that. So we could confirm some of the numbers that we saw in there, which seemed low to us as we looked at it. But we'll take a look both at the jail and the sheriff's office for that. And then the construction costs may have changed also. I know there's been an escalation pricing, that, I've seen overall here. We want to confirm that. I have some recent pricing, from a study we're doing in, Clinton County, Michigan. Similar sized community, as your county, and, so we had the three construction managers there, look at the diagrams that we had put together and put some numbers to it. So we want to be able to have that all put together for you so that we have a new look at it, a new fresh look, make sure we, get to the bottom line that you need, at the end of the day with the services. And, sometimes it's, it's about looking at how you can add on for the future, build what you need for today plus 10 years, and then make sure you have capacity to add on after that. It's you never know what's going to happen in the next 10 years, right? So things can change, and trends always do. Our team's been around a long time, and we've seen a lot of different changes. So overall, from our standpoint, we think it needs a fresh look, and that leads us to why we need to have a fresh look, because we need to make sure it's right, for what you want as part of your community, how you want to serve the community, and then how all that gets put together. And I can come with a design, but it's not helpful because every design is different for every community. You all have different needs. You do the same thing, but you all do it a little bit differently, and the ideas are a little bit different. Some use different evidence-based practices, others, there's a whole set of different things going on. So we want to make sure we have what's appropriate in programs, what's appropriate for restorative justice, for your medical mental health, addiction, co-occurring disorders. There's a whole weave of things that are just, continuing to happen. More humane environment, sounds counterintuitive to a lot of the community usually, but the idea of a more humane jail, for example, is it reduces stress, and it reduces stress not just for those in custody, but also for the sheriff's team, because they're the only people that are sentenced to this facility. You heard Rod say, 80% are out within 3 days. So that's true. So, but you need to reduce that stress so there aren't things happening that, that are hard to control. So those are the kinds of things that we think are important. And our proposal to the county and to this team really is to facilitate that in probably the next, by the end of June, I think is our time frame here, with 3 workshops overall. First would be the why. What's the underlying purpose behind how you want to operate, both the sheriff's side and the jail. So mission and values and things that you probably talked about a lot, and this should be a pretty easy piece of it, but we can't get to the next workshop unless we know how you want to operate, because the configurations, the sizes, the types of programs, that was another area in the space list that was a little short. And so, we don't know why, but it, probably costs bringing things to a point, but we need to be sure we know what the rules are so that we can get you the best facility at the right price, and then figure out how to do other things as we move forth. So programs, operational strategies, ending with the space list, and then the way we do our planning really is put it together. It looks like a building, but it's still a diagram. But then it allows us to test the grossing factors to be sure that we're consistent in doing the right things overall. And then that I can get and price, since I have the 3 prices already from Clinton from just 2 months ago now. We can kind of prove where we are, what we're doing, make sure we're within the guidelines that you want to get to the millage, and need to get to the millage, if that's, you know, if that's part of it. We'll also then, as we've done all this work with mission and values and programs and all that, it'll become pretty apparent what the benefit to the community is, we think. So that would end up being the third workshop. So Paul will lead the workshop 1. I'll lead the workshop 2. And we haven't talked about how we're gonna do workshop 3, but I'll be here always to represent. It's Chicago. It takes me about 5 hours to get here from Chicago, where I live. Yeah, I do go a little fast, I think, but yeah, but it's well, you know, I'm used to going to, you know, turning the corner in Calcasta and cutting across to get to Alpena, but it's only 3 hours longer than it takes me to go from my suburban house to my downtown office. So doesn't feel like it's that long. It's kind of stupid, you know, when you look at it that way. So we'll be working here with you. So that's our proposal to help facilitate and have a fresh look at it. Because you want to be sure, you want to make sure it's right. You want to do all the things, and I'm sure a lot of you have worked on it all the way through in the past, and it's not that work isn't substantial, but it's time, because things are continuing to change. I think for us to take another look at it for you. So that is what we have for you. Sure, there's all kinds of questions and stuff.
I have one question
Yes,
here. A key word that I heard come out of, your conversation is we're smaller than what you expected. You
Yes,
said you had to expand.
yes.
Could you elaborate on that for me?
I can. So when you look at the space list in the master plan document, it lists every room for everything you guys talked about at the time. And then at the bottom, there's a departmental gross factor. Those numbers are really low at 15%. You take a building like this, you really need a departmental gross. But the terminology, let me explain that quickly for you. A net square foot is the dimensions inside of the room, no walls, it's the inside of the room. And then when you have a department, you need to connect the different offices together with corridor, things like that. So that's the departmental grossing factor, which they apply to that. Typically in an office, it's 30 to 35%. And the program showed it at 15%. Some programmers make that up in the grossing factor of the building, where you add walls, restrooms, and other things like that. Because this study was done kind of agnostically, because you had so many different options to look at in the master plan, whether it was a renovation or a new building. I'm not sure how the final numbers got to where they were, and none of the costs show the square footage. But it's pretty unusual at the end of the day for the jail to be only a third of the building at this size. It's closer to a 50-50 number as you look at how the two components were. And again, I'm not here to criticize, none of us are, because, you know, work is work, and there's always factors that push into this. So whether money was the issue or other things that shrunk things or did things, I don't know, but that's part of what we want to look at. But, you know, the jail factors are like at 30%, they should be at 50, for example. Corridors are wider. It's just geometry. So those are the things that we saw that kind of made us take a look and say, yeah, we should look at this again. It's not that the spaces might not be correct, but how they connect and how things are put together may be an issue, but they may not be. we just, we haven't had a whole lot of time to look. So, does that answer your question, Sheriff?
Yes.
Thank you.
The walls are wider too in the jail. And
True, yeah, that is true. You got an extra 3 inches
the
there.
program, because the program has the net spaces,
Yeah.
the walls, the corridors, none of that is in the program that you develop at this point.
Yeah.
And that has to be reflected in the gross footage. And those are the numbers that Henry's saying, we better take another look at it. This firm has the experience of being asked to build a jail that they didn't have enough money to build from the day they were hired in Alpena, and somehow they did it. And so we want to try not to put the county in that situation and whatever architect you hire in that situation when it passes.
Exactly. That was, it was kind of brutal up there, but we got it done.
Yeah, it was.
That's where part of my question was coming from
Yeah.
was. Now you're saying 50-50. Now I'm starting to see more dollar signs.
Yes. Exactly. That's why that's why we think we need to have some sessions with the team to be sure we get it right. And we could be wrong, but guessing we're not, but it's, unfortunately, this happens a lot. And we don't really build things really big, so, we build them to the standards, we build, I don't build 10-foot wide corridors, for example, in the jail, I could. But 7 feet is, every jail I do is that's what's needed to walk somebody down the hall with you and have another person coming the other way, so it's all the important things, we keep them as small as we can. But on the other hand, the other thing to look at is like day rooms. If they're too small, if I went to the state's standard of 20 square foot per inmate, you wouldn't be able to physically get in. But by the time you put your tables and things like that, and they did use 35 square feet, which is the ACA standard, for example. But being, if you think of your living room, what size your living room is. Let's say you're a family of 4 and maybe your living room is, 10 by 14. Do the quick math, and that's 35 square foot per person. But you're all friendly, you all, well, theoretically friendly and like each other, but your family. But if 4 of you are in that room, that's what is kind of the standard nationally for that. Is that the right amount? You can, say yes, but it might be better at 50 to provide better emergency access and other things. So those are the kinds of things I think we need to explore. And not to make the thing bigger, but that makes it more humane and more conducive to operationally making those spaces work, for example. Okay. Yes.
Are there some best practices out there that kind of rely more on an open concept so the sheriff's department can see kind of more what's going on, and you have less corridors but more open space? And there was reference to, I think, Leelanau's jail in one of our meetings, and how they thought differently in building that.
Yes.
I'm wondering if that might reduce the percentage of corridor space we might need.
You want to grab that, Rob? Rod?
The biggest challenge in a small jail is the separations that you have to provide. And the number of separations we need to put in today is different than it was 20 years ago. And basically it has to do with gender. Now we're dealing with male, female, and another third category that increasingly we have to accommodate and separate. So it's the open spaces are harder to achieve in a small jail. I encourage all of you to get to Alpena at some time to take a look at their jail, which is it has what, 13 separations for long-term housing
Yeah.
and another 6 or 7 in short term in the intake area. And that today and Paul, you're living with that with your jail that you're opening. To be able to properly separate people at the front end and throughout their time in the facility, those are the numbers of separate housing units or short-term spaces we need to provide. Leelanau didn't have to deal with that as much. I mean, they were built before that kind of descended on us. But also what you'll see is that, and especially if you go to Alpena, is the perception of the space is really influenced and can be improved by getting natural light into the building, not through skylights. They're nice to have, and you'll have those, but also coming in horizontally and coming into the building through windows that are on the walls, not in the ceiling. And so if you go to Alpena, you'll see a lot of that natural light there that will take a day room and make it look bigger and feel bigger than it might be on the ground. I hope that made sense.
Thanks.
Actually, in our practice, we're meeting with people that have existing older jails that were had direct supervision, 40 to 60 people in a day room. And they're going crazy because they need more separation. So we're also looking for those people, as Rob mentioned, to figure out how to get more separations in these bigger facilities. So, and I think the other point is a lot of people use dormitory style. You can do them in a smaller unit. You could do a 4 or 8 or 12 or whatever. But ultimately you lose flexibility. If you have a cell versus an open dorm, you can still place people in the cells and provide a little bit more separation and operational flexibility overall versus an open area that people are cohabiting in. So it's cheaper to have that open area, but it's operationally, you have to balance that.
Causes more issues.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about Michigan is they give you exact percentages of what, like a maximum cell area has to be 10% of the total capacity of the facility. So if you have a 100-bed jail, I don't do really good math, so I picked 100 just for that reason. But 10 of those cells have to be maximum. That's for the state, that's the minimum. If I had 9, we wouldn't pass. So you have to look at that. A double bunk, basically, multi-celled, you can get up to 75%. Nothing more than 75. If I have 76 cells, they won't pass it. So that still leaves a little bit left over. So you do actually end up with either more singles than what's required to make that up, or you provide a trustee or a work release, something that makes up the difference. And you can get up to about 40% if you really want to go crazy with a dormitory style. So there's constraints by the state in how they would look at the jail and how it operates, so that way, at the very minimum. So and it never includes any of the beds in the intake center, the booking area. Those are not rated or any medical beds that you might have also. So there's all kinds of fun things going on. So finding that right balance for you is important to make sure we get that. And the other program did have some dormitory. I think it was like 16 people dormitory. So there's, that's part of what we want to revisit and what we know and how things are changing. Literally these separations requirements, they're 5, 6, 7 years old now. How people are looking to separate people. So it's, just at the end of that study that's when it really started coming full bore. So those are some of the reasons we want to take another look at for you.
And I'll just kind of remind you that the work that's done up through the end of June is all, as Henry said, it's diagrams that show how it's a list, as a program of spaces and diagrams of how they might fit together, but they're not designs. That design process takes a lot more time than that, and it takes a lot more participation by the operators. So what you're going to get is a better handle on the numbers, the number of square feet and the type of a building. And you need to update your construction costs because they have risen since 2018. When the old study was done, they've gone up substantially, but this does not get you to the point where you have a building design to show anybody. And the good part about that is it means after it passes, you can spend the time you need with the architects that you pick to design the building and make it do everything you want it to do and spend that time on it.
Other questions? We're right at our 2 minutes over our time allotted by the agenda, so.
Brad, do you
That's
have-
a first.
Didn't we have a design layout plan that was completed like mid last year?
Yes, did you incorporated that in some of your?
I don't believe I've seen that. I've only seen the master plan.
I've seen it.
You've seen it, okay, well, I haven't seen that. Sorry.
It's it's a Securitas plan. When
Okay.
we interviewed architects after the successful referendum in Alpena, one of the firms that was chosen to present put that plan, literally that plan up on the wall and said, don't worry, it's already done. And it's a form of design that is kind of like cutting a square into a lot of pieces of a pie that most people haven't adopted to do, but that what you saw there was that cookie cutter design that they've tried to pitch to Alpena, and they have built them in some places, but before you adopt that design, you really need to understand what you're getting into operationally with that.
It was only ever intended as a preliminary design to
Yeah.
give the board especially a picture of what they were even looking at.
Yeah,
The kind of the scale that you're looking at more than anything.
okay. Other questions, thoughts?
I appreciate the data that you showed today and the discussion around the data and starting there, and the process sounds good too.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. We got the data we had available, and we're able to get it done quickly. So Mike did a great job doing that with Paul and Rod doing the analysis. So good news is I like to draw and do other things, so I'm really happy these guys like doing that kind of stuff. So. Well, really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this, and hopefully everybody's agreeable. We'll be seeing a bunch of you sooner than later.
So thank you so much.
All right.
And thank you, Rod,
Thanks, everybody.
Paul, and
Thank
Mike.
you.